The planet Arcanus was covered in red dust and broken metal. Smoke rose from the ground where fire still burned from the last battle. The sky was gray, filled with the sound of distant thunder and explosions. Commander Karen, a tall and proud alien warrior, stood among her troops. Her armor shone dark silver, scratched and dented from many fights. She was a Valorian, a race known for strength and honor. To her people, fear was shameful, and pain was proof of loyalty. For years, Karen had led her army against the human forces. She never questioned orders. She fought for her planet and her people, but that day everything changed. The humans had retreated to the cliffs, and Karen believed victory was near. Her soldiers cheered as they marched forward through the rocky valley. But suddenly the ground under her feet trembled. A strange clicking sound echoed, too late to understand what it was. In the next instant, a blast of light and fire threw her into the air. The explosion was louder than anything she had ever heard. Her vision went white, then black. When she opened her eyes again, she was lying on the ground. The air was thick with smoke, and her ears rang. She tried to move, but her body refused. Pain burned through her lower half. Then she saw it. Her legs were gone. For a moment, Karen didn't believe it. She thought she was dreaming or trapped in a nightmare. But when she tried to move again, only empty space met her eyes. Her breath caught in her throat. The proud commander who had led hundreds of soldiers could now barely lift her head. She pressed her claws into the ground and dragged herself behind a broken wall, her heart pounding. Around her, the cries of battle grew faint. Her communication device flickered. She could hear the voices of her squad shouting for retreat. "Commander, we have to fall back. The humans have mined the valley," one of them yelled. Karen tried to answer, but her voice was weak. "Leave me," she managed to whisper. "Go, that is an order." They hesitated. But when the next round of explosions started, they followed her command and fled. In her heart, she knew they had no choice. Still, as the sound of footsteps disappeared into the distance, she felt a hollow ache deeper than her wounds. The war that once gave her purpose had now left her behind like a piece of broken metal. Hours passed. The sky darkened, turning from gray to black. Rain began to fall, washing the dust and blood from her armor. Karen lay there, shivering, unable to move. She thought about her family back home. Her father, her sister, the small garden she used to tend before the war. Would they ever know what happened to her? Would anyone care? Her breathing grew slower. She knew what it meant. Without medical help, she would die before sunrise. And maybe that was easier, she thought. A warrior's end on the battlefield. But still, a small part of her refused to accept it. Then through the rain and smoke, a shadow moved. At first, she thought it was another enemy soldier coming to finish the job. She tried to reach for her weapon, but her hands trembled too much. The figure stepped closer. It was a human, tall, wearing a damaged combat suit, his face hidden behind a cracked helmet. "Easy. I'm not here to hurt you," he said in a low, calm voice. Karen didn't believe him. Why would a human help her? They were enemies. But his tone was strange, not hateful, not cruel. Just tired. He slowly set down his weapon and knelt beside her. His name tag read Sergeant Ethan Cole. He looked at her wounds, his face tightening with worry. "You're still alive," he said quietly. "You're lucky," Karen gave a bitter laugh. "Lucky?" she whispered. "You call this lucky?" He didn't answer. Instead, he pulled a small medical kit from his belt and began working. His hands were quick but gentle. He wrapped her wounds with tight bandages to stop the bleeding, then gave her water. She watched him in confusion. He was human, her enemy, yet he treated her like one of his own. "Why?" she asked weakly. "Why not just leave me here?" Ethan paused for a moment. The rain fell harder, dripping from his helmet. "Because no one deserves to die alone," he said simply. Those words struck her heart. No one had ever spoken to her like that, not even among her own people. For the first time in her life, she didn't see a soldier in front of her. She saw a person. He carried her, though she was heavy and he was wounded himself. Each step he took left deep prints in the muddy ground. He found an old bunker nearby, half buried under rock and sand. Inside, he laid her down on a dry spot, covered her with his cloak, and lit a small fire from broken metal parts. Karen wanted to speak, to ask him why he was risking his life for her. But her strength was fading fast. She looked at him through heavy eyes. He sat beside her, cleaning his rifle but keeping an eye on her breathing. His face looked tired and lonely, yet determined. As the night grew cold, Karen's eyelids grew heavy. She thought about the strange human sitting beside her. He could have left her there to die like everyone else did. But he didn't. And that thought warmed her more than the fire ever could. Before sleep took her, she whispered, "What is your name?" "Ethan," he said. "Just Ethan," she nodded faintly. "I am Karen." "Then rest, Karen," he replied softly. "You're safe now, safe." The word felt strange on her tongue. She hadn't felt safe since the war began. Yet in that ruined bunker with the rain falling outside and a human guarding her life, she believed him. For the first time since the explosion, Karen closed her eyes not in pain, but in fragile peace. And while the world outside still burned with war and hatred, two enemies sat side by side in silence, one human, one alien, brought together not by orders or power, but by something much stronger, compassion. That night was the beginning of a story neither of them could have imagined. A story born not from victory, but from kindness found in the ashes of battle. When Karen woke up, the soft crackling of fire was the first sound she heard. For a moment, she didn't know where she was. The bunker smelled of dust and old metal, but it was warm. Her wounds no longer bled, though her body felt weak and heavy. When she tried to move, pain spread through her lower half like lightning. Then she remembered the explosion, the battlefield, and the human soldier who had saved her. Ethan sat near the fire, fixing a broken radio. His uniform was torn and his arm was wrapped in a blood-stained bandage. When he noticed her watching, he smiled faintly. "You're awake," he said. "That's good." Karen blinked, still confused. "Why are you still here?" she asked in a tired voice. "Your army will be looking for you." He shrugged. "Maybe. But I wasn't going to leave you lying in the mud." She stared at him, trying to understand. Her people had always told her that humans were selfish and cruel, only caring for themselves. Yet this one had risked his life to save hers. "You make no sense," she muttered. Ethan chuckled softly. "That's what my captain says too." For the next few days, the two of them shared the small bunker. Ethan did everything he could to keep them alive. He searched the nearby wreckage for food packs and medical supplies. He built a small metal door to block the cold wind at night. Each time he returned, he brought something new: a blanket, a piece of armor, a handful of berries. Karen didn't want to depend on him, but she had no choice. Her legs were gone and she couldn't move far. It was a feeling she hated. All her life she had been strong, proud, and independent. Now she couldn't even stand without help. Each time Ethan helped her drink or adjusted her bandages, a fire of shame burned inside her. "Stop looking at me like I'm broken," she snapped one day when he tried to feed her. Ethan looked surprised. "I don't see you as broken," he said calmly. "You're alive. That's what matters." She turned away, pretending not to care, but his words stayed with her. No one had ever spoken to her like that before. Over time, they started to talk more. At first, it was only simple things: where he came from, what his unit was like, what food he missed from Earth. He told her about his home, about wide oceans and blue skies. Karen listened quietly, imagining those things she had never seen. In return, she told him about her world, Valoria, the floating gardens and the twin suns that set the sky on fire at dusk. When Ethan heard that, he smiled and said, "Sounds beautiful." "It was," she replied softly, "before the war." Sometimes, when the nights were cold, they shared stories to stay awake. Ethan told her about his little sister who waited for him back home. Karen told him about her father, a respected war leader who had taught her never to show weakness. "He would be ashamed to see me like this," she whispered once. Ethan looked at her with kind eyes. "I don't think so," he said. He'd see someone who's still fighting. That night, Karen didn't sleep. She lay awake thinking about what he said. Was she still a warrior? Or just a broken soldier waiting to die? Days turned into weeks. The wound on her body started to heal, but the wound inside her heart was slower. Ethan made crude metal supports from pieces of armor he found, trying to create something that might help her move again. They were heavy and uneven, but when he showed them to her, his eyes were full of hope. "I made these for you," he said. "They're not perfect, but maybe you can use them." Karen stared at the strange metal frames. "You think I can walk with these?" "I think you can do anything you want," Ethan said with a smile. With his help, she tried to stand. It was painful and she fell twice. But each time she pushed herself back up, refusing to quit. Sweat ran down her face and her arms shook from the effort. After many tries, she managed to balance for a few seconds. Ethan's eyes lit up like sunlight through clouds. "You did it," he said proudly. Karen breathed heavily, leaning against him for support. For the first time since the explosion, she smiled, not out of pride but out of hope. "Maybe I did," she whispered. From that day on, they trained together. Ethan built simple exercises for her, and she followed them every morning. He was patient even when she got angry at herself or at him. "Don't give up," he would say. "One step at a time." They were no longer enemies. They were two survivors trying to live through the same nightmare. One evening, as the red sun sank behind the hills, Karen noticed Ethan sitting outside the bunker, staring at the horizon. His shoulders looked heavy, his face tired. She dragged herself closer and asked quietly, "What troubles you?" He hesitated before answering. "I lost many friends in that battle," he said. "I couldn't save them. I keep thinking maybe I should have done more." Karen was silent for a while. Then she said, "You saved me. Maybe that's what you were meant to do." Ethan looked at her, surprised by her words. For a moment, the sadness in his eyes softened. "Maybe," he said quietly. From that moment, their connection deepened. They no longer spoke like soldier and enemy, but like two people who understood each other's pain. They began to share laughter, even small jokes to lighten the darkness around them. Sometimes Ethan taught her human words. Sometimes she taught him Valorian ones. The bunker that once felt like a cage now felt like a home. But even as they found comfort in each other's company, they both knew their situation couldn't last forever. Supplies were running low and their radios still couldn't reach anyone. The war outside had not stopped. It had only moved farther away. Still, in that forgotten corner of a dying planet, a human and an alien found something the war had stolen from both of them: trust. And every night, when Ethan kept watch and Karen rested beside the fire, both silently promised themselves that if they ever got out alive, they would make sure the world knew what they had learned, that even in war, kindness could still exist, and enemies could still find friendship. The fragile bond between them grew stronger with every passing day, like a small plant growing through cracks in stone. Neither of them knew what fate had planned next, but for the first time, neither of them felt alone. The days slowly turned into weeks, and the bunker that once felt like a place of fear now became a strange kind of home for Ethan and Karen. The sound of battle was far away now. Sometimes distant thunder echoed through the mountains, but it was hard to tell if it came from storms or explosions. The air outside was cold and the nights were long, but inside the bunker there was warmth, not just from the fire, but from their growing friendship. Karen had started to heal. Her wounds were no longer open, though scars covered her legs where metal used to be. Ethan made sure her bandages stayed clean, and he built her better metal supports from stronger parts he found among the ruins. It took him many tries, but each time he failed, he just smiled and said, "We'll make them better." At first, Karen didn't believe she could ever move again, but Ethan's patience slowly gave her courage. Every morning, when the sun touched the red rocks outside, he helped her stand. She leaned on the metal supports and tried to take one small step. The sound of her armor scraping the ground filled the bunker. Sometimes she fell, but Ethan was always there to catch her. "Don't stop," he would say. "Even a single step is progress." Karen's pride, once her greatest weakness, became her strength again. She refused to give up. Every day she pushed herself harder, lifting her body with her arms and balancing with the makeshift legs Ethan had built. At night she would lie awake, her muscles aching, but inside she felt alive again. One afternoon, as they trained outside, Ethan watched her from a few steps away. Her movements were slow but full of determination. The sunlight reflected off her silver armor, and for a moment she looked like the warrior she had once been. "You're doing great," he said. Karen smiled faintly, catching her breath. "You are a strange human, Ethan. You treat me as if I still have strength." He looked at her seriously. "That's because you do." Her heart warmed at his words. No one had ever believed in her like that before, not even her own people. In the evenings after training, they would sit near the fire, sharing what little food they had. Sometimes Ethan cooked the dry rations with melted rainwater to make them taste better. They joked that it was 5-star food from Earth. Karen laughed at his silly humor, and for the first time in months, her laughter didn't sound bitter. One night, a storm hit the valley. Lightning flashed through the cracks of the bunker, and thunder rolled like drums of war. The wind howled, shaking the metal walls. Karen shivered despite the fire. She looked at Ethan and said quietly, "Does it ever stop? The sound of war?" Ethan stared into the flames. "I don't know," he said softly. "But I think peace begins when we stop fighting in our hearts." His words stayed with her long after the storm ended. The next morning they went out to find supplies. The battlefield was quiet now, full of broken machines and empty helmets buried in dust. The silence was heavy. Karen moved slowly beside Ethan, using her metal supports. Every step was difficult, but she refused to stop. Ethan walked beside her, alert and protective. Suddenly they heard movement in the distance. Ethan raised his weapon, motioning for her to stay behind him. Out of the fog, 3 enemy scouts appeared. They were armed and searching through the wreckage. Ethan whispered, "We have to stay low." But one of the scouts spotted them. "Over there!" he shouted. Ethan fired a warning shot, forcing the scouts to take cover. "Run!" he told Karen, but she couldn't move fast enough. The scouts began to circle them. Bullets hit the rocks around them, sending dust into the air. Karen's heart pounded. She grabbed a fallen piece of metal and used it like a shield while Ethan returned fire. His aim was sharp, but they were outnumbered. A shot hit the ground near Karen, knocking her off balance. Ethan rushed to her side, helping her up despite the danger. "You shouldn't have come for me," she gasped. "I told you before," he said, pulling her toward cover. "I'm not leaving you." They hid behind a crashed ship until the scouts finally retreated, realizing they were wasting ammo. When the area grew quiet again, Ethan dropped his weapon and laughed breathlessly. "That was close," he said. Karen looked at him, still shaken. "You could have died," he shrugged. "Maybe. But if I had, it would have been protecting someone who mattered." She was speechless. For a long moment, she simply stared at him. She had been trained to see humans as enemies, but this stubborn Marine, had risked his life again and again for her. Something inside her heart began to change. That night, neither of them spoke much. The fire crackled softly and rain tapped gently on the metal roof. Karen looked at Ethan as he cleaned his rifle, his face tired but calm. She felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Safety. "Ethan," she said quietly, "you should have left me on the battlefield. You didn't have to do all this." He looked up at her and smiled. "Maybe I didn't have to, but I wanted to." There was no more to say. She turned her face toward the fire, her eyes soft. Over the next few days, their bond grew even stronger. They learned to read each other's moods without words. Ethan would know when she needed rest. Karen would know when he was troubled. Sometimes she caught him staring at the stars at night, lost in thought. "What are you thinking?" she asked one evening. "I'm thinking that you're stronger than anyone I've ever met," he said, "and that maybe one day our worlds won't hate each other anymore." Karen smiled sadly. "That day will take a long time. Then we'll wait," Ethan replied. She admired his hope. It was strange but comforting, like a light shining in the ruins around them. The days that followed were filled with small victories. Karen learned to move faster on her supports. She even managed to climb a short rock ledge, something she thought she'd never do again. Ethan clapped and cheered like a proud friend, and she laughed at his childlike joy. Though danger still surrounded them, they had found something priceless: trust. 2 souls who should have been enemies had become a team. Every night when the stars appeared, Karen looked up and whispered a quiet promise to herself. "I will live. Not just for me, but for him too." And somewhere deep inside, she began to believe that maybe, even in the middle of war, friendship could be stronger than fear. Weeks passed, and the bond between Ethan and Karen became stronger than either of them expected. They were no longer 2 strangers from different worlds. They were partners in survival. Every day they worked together to gather food, repair equipment, and improve Karen's mobility. She could now walk short distances using her metal supports, and though her steps were slow, her pride had returned. Sometimes Ethan would watch her practice under the fading light of the twin moons. "You're unstoppable," he would say with a grin. Karen would shake her head and reply softly, "No, Ethan, you're the one who refused to stop believing." But both knew their time in that forgotten valley couldn't last forever. Supplies were running low, and the radio Ethan had been fixing for weeks still refused to send a strong signal. Then one evening, as the sky glowed with red and gold, something changed. A faint voice crackled through the static of the radio. "This is Command Base Delta. Sergeant Ethan Cole, respond if you're alive. Ethan froze. His heart jumped. He grabbed the radio. This is Cole. I'm alive. I repeat, I'm alive. The signal was weak, but it was enough. After weeks of silence, they had finally reached someone. Karen looked at him, her eyes uncertain. They found you, she said quietly. Ethan turned to her with a mix of joy and worry. They found us, he said, but Karen shook her head. No, they will come for you, not me. To them, I am still the enemy. He fell silent. Deep down, he knew she was right. Human soldiers would not risk rescuing an alien warrior, especially one once known as a fierce commander. Yet he couldn't imagine leaving her behind. A few days later, a rescue ship appeared in the sky. It landed in the open field near the cliffs, sending waves of dust through the air. Ethan and Karen stood together watching the ramp lower. A group of human soldiers stepped out, weapons ready. Sergeant Cole, the leader called out. You're alive. We thought you were gone, Ethan saluted weakly. It's good to see you, sir. The man's eyes moved past him, and then froze when he saw Karen standing beside him, her silver armor gleaming in the sunlight. Instantly, the soldiers raised their weapons. Sir, she's with me, Ethan said quickly, stepping in front of her. The commander frowned. With you? That's a Valorian warrior, Cole. She's the enemy. Step aside, Ethan stood firm. She's not the enemy anymore. She saved my life as much as I saved hers. Karen looked at him, her heart tightening. She knew what was coming. Ethan, she said softly, let me go. You have done enough. He shook his head. No, I made a promise. The soldiers moved closer, forming a half circle around them. The commander's voice grew sharp. You don't understand, Sergeant. We can't take her. Command will never approve it. She's a war prisoner and our orders are clear. Ethan's hands clenched. Then tell Command I'm not leaving without her. There was silence. The soldiers exchanged confused looks. The commander sighed heavily. You realize what you're saying? You'll be court-martialed. You could lose everything. Ethan's voice was steady. She already lost everything. And still she fought to live. If you can't see her worth, then I don't care about rank or orders. Karen's eyes filled with emotion. She had faced countless battles, but this act of loyalty felt heavier than any war. She reached out, touching Ethan's arm lightly. Ethan, please, don't ruin your life for me. He looked at her, his eyes calm and kind. It's my life to give. The commander hesitated. He had seen many soldiers in his time, but never had he seen one stand up like this. Not for a human, and certainly not for an alien. After a long pause, he lowered his weapon. Fine, he said quietly. She comes with us. But if Command questions this, it's on you. Ethan nodded firmly. I'll take the blame. The soldiers lowered their guns. Ethan helped Karen onto the ship, his hand steady on her arm. As they entered, she looked back at the valley one last time. The place where pain had turned into hope, and where two enemies had become friends. Inside the ship, the other soldiers stared at her with curiosity and fear. She ignored their looks. All she cared about was that Ethan was beside her. When the engines roared to life and the ground began to shrink below, she whispered, I never thought I would leave this place alive. Ethan smiled softly. You weren't supposed to, but sometimes fate changes its mind. The ship flew through the clouds, leaving the battlefield behind. But even as they returned to safety, new challenges awaited them. When they arrived at the human base, Karen was kept in a secure medical room. She was given food and water, but guards watched her every move. Ethan visited her every day, bringing stories and smiles to keep her spirits strong. One day, a high-ranking officer came to see Ethan. You've caused quite a stir, the officer said. Command doesn't know what to do with her. Some want to send her back. Others think she's too dangerous. Ethan crossed his arms. She's not dangerous. She's a survivor. She deserves a chance, the officer sighed. You risked your career for her, why? Ethan looked him straight in the eye. Because she would have done the same for me. Word of Ethan's defiance spread quickly through the base. Some called him a fool. Others called him brave. But to Karen, he was simply Ethan, the man who refused to see her as a monster. One night, as she sat in her room, Ethan brought her a small piece of metal, polished and shaped like a medal. What is this? She asked. It's part of my dog tag, he said with a smile, so you won't forget me when they send you home. Karen held it tightly in her hand. I could never forget you, Ethan. You showed me what true courage looks like. When he left that night, Karen looked at the small tag again. It wasn't just a piece of metal. It was a symbol of hope, of loyalty, and of the friendship that had been born in the ashes of war. And though the days ahead were uncertain, one thing was clear: their story was far from over. Because sometimes, the strongest warriors are not the ones who fight the hardest battles, but the ones who choose compassion, even when the world tells them not to. Months passed since the day Ethan and Karen were rescued from the war zone. The war between humans and Valorians had begun to cool, though peace was still uncertain. The galaxy had grown tired of fighting, but wounds, and both seen and unseen, had took longer to heal. At the human medical base, Karen's recovery became a story of quiet strength. Doctors and scientists worked together to help her walk again. They studied her physiology and built her a pair of new mechanical legs, stronger, lighter, and perfectly balanced. It took weeks of testing and adjustment, but when she finally stood upright for the first time without Ethan's support, the room fell silent. Her silver armor had been replaced by simple training clothes, and her once fearsome eyes now held something different: peace. She took a small step, then another, her movements slow but steady. Ethan stood nearby, watching proudly. "You're doing it," he said softly. Karen smiled, her voice calm but filled with emotion. "No, we're doing it. I couldn't have reached this point without you." Ethan chuckled. "I only pushed you to remember who you already were." As days passed, Karen began to train again, not for war, but for balance, control, and confidence. Each morning she walked the long hallways of the medical wing. Soldiers and nurses would stop to stare, amazed at the sight of a Valorian warrior walking beside a human marine. Some saluted Ethan out of respect. Others nodded silently to Karen, uncertain how to treat her. One afternoon, a group of children, the sons and daughters of soldiers, were visiting the base. When they saw Karen's shining prosthetic legs and tall frame, they approached her shyly. "Miss, were you really in the war?" a small boy asked. Karen knelt down, smiling kindly. "Yes," she said, "but war is not something to be proud of. What matters is what we learn after it ends." The children nodded, wide-eyed, and one of them offered her a small drawing of the Earth and Valoria side by side. "This is for you," the child said. Karen held the drawing gently. "It's beautiful. Thank you." Ethan watched from a distance, a quiet smile on his face. It amazed him how much she had changed, not weaker. Not smaller, but wiser and calmer. Later that evening, as the sun set over the horizon, Karen found Ethan sitting outside the base looking at the orange sky. She joined him, sitting quietly for a moment. The breeze carried the scent of metal and sand. "You know," Ethan said softly, "Command has finally agreed to start peace talks with your people. They want to meet on neutral ground next month." Karen turned to him, surprised. "After all this time?" He nodded. "They said your survival story changed a lot of minds. People started seeing that we're not so different." Karen looked away, her eyes shining faintly. "If that's true, it's because of you. You didn't see an enemy that day. You saw a person." Ethan smiled. "Maybe that's what we all need to do. See people, not sides." They sat in silence for a while, watching the stars begin to appear one by one. Karen finally spoke again, her voice thoughtful. "When I was lying on that battlefield, I thought my life had ended, but you showed me that it had only changed." Ethan looked at her with quiet respect. "And you showed me what real courage looks like. Not just fighting, but choosing to live when everything feels lost." Their friendship had become something unbreakable, built not on duty, but on shared struggle. They had both lost much, yet somehow found meaning in that loss. In the weeks that followed, Karen was invited to join the first peace summit between humans and Valorians. Ethan accompanied her as a representative of the human military. The meeting took place on a neutral planet, a place of white stone and tall glass towers that reflected the stars. When Karen entered the great hall, many stared. A Valorian warrior standing beside a human soldier was a sight no one had imagined possible a year ago. The council began, full of tension at first. Leaders argued, voices rose, and silence fell again. But when Karen spoke, the room grew still. "I once believed humans were my enemies," she began. "I fought them without mercy. But then I met one, a Marine named Ethan Cole, who saw me not as a monster but as a life worth saving. On that battlefield, we did not speak the same language. Yet we understood something greater: compassion. If two enemies can find trust in the ashes of war, then surely our worlds can too. Her words echoed through the hall. Even the most hardened generals lowered their eyes. Ethan watched her proudly, knowing that her voice carried the weight of truth. When the meeting ended, the room erupted in applause. It wasn't a peace treaty yet, but it was the beginning of one. The first real step toward understanding. That night, Karen and Ethan walked together under the stars outside the summit hall. "You spoke beautifully," he said. "I think your father would be proud." Karen smiled faintly. "For the first time, I think he would be." They stood in silence for a long moment, listening to the soft hum of the wind. "What will you do now?" Ethan asked. Karen looked at the stars above them, the same stars that had once watched her fall and rise again. "I don't know," she said honestly. "Maybe help others like me. Teach them that life doesn't end with loss." Ethan nodded. "That sounds like a good plan. And if you ever need someone to build more metal legs or fix a broken radio, you know who to call." She laughed softly. "I wouldn't trust anyone else." Before they parted that night, Karen handed him something, the small piece of metal he had once given her from his dog tag. "This belongs to you," she said. He shook his head. "No, it belongs to both of us now." And so, the metal stayed with her, a reminder of the human who stood beside her when the world turned away. Years later, when the first joint academy for human and Valorian soldiers opened, a statue was placed in its courtyard. It showed two figures, a human marine and a Valorian warrior, standing side by side. The plaque beneath read, "Courage is not in fighting for your world, but in believing another world is worth saving too." Visitors often asked about the story behind it, and those who knew would smile and say, "That's the story of Ethan Cole and Commander Karen. Two souls who proved that kindness can heal even the scars of war." And somewhere, far from the battlefield where it all began, the stars shone brighter as if they too remembered.